That was a really fruitful two panels we had. I'm not going to do the substance justice, but let me just pick up on a few points and look back a little bit at this symposium series to help us do that. As Chairman Fgall said at the beginning, opening, this is the 10th RIETI-ANU symposium. We started in 2018. This symposium series, we've explored regional issues from a middle power or small open economy perspective. That really started in 2018 with the celebration of Japan's leadership in concluding CPTPP and asking what's next. So the topic of today that Urata-san and I really thought would be helpful to think about of Asia's response to great power disruption and global economic disorder was timely, I think, as many of these discussions are these days. And sadly, because we continue on this trajectory, as Jose said, really towards disorder. And we want to think about ideas to correct this trajectory. I really want to thank RIETI today for hosting us, but also for the support RIETI has shown in these last 8 years or 7 years and 10 symposiums, and really for convening these important discussions in public. And I think it's important that we have these discussions, as we heard, in public, to air the differences of opinion, but to try to find consensus and converge on ideas. I hope our work can help inform some of the policy thinking in Japan, as it does around the region. I think having these discussions between officials in secret, as Kawase-san said, or not in public, of course is necessary, but that can be helped greatly by us having these discussions at a track 2 level in the public domain. And really taking a step back, thinking about the middle power leadership that we need, these coalitions, I can't see these coalitions working or collective effort working without Japan's leadership. We can't get our act together and protect the multilateral system, and that 85%, as Kawase-san says, I think needs Japanese leadership. And Australia. We'll get to Australia in a second. And that's not just for our region, but I think that's where we have the most influence, is in our region. That 85% of trade outside the United States, but also the rest of the global economy, even if you take the great powers, China and the United States, out of it. This kind of leadership we'll need from Japan and other middle powers is going to become more important as the choices that countries face become sharper and more consequential. They already are, but I think we've seen just over the last 8 years or so, these choices becoming harder. The ASEAN meetings in Kuala Lumpur in 10 days' time will be potentially very important to show how Southeast Asia can mobilise as a positive force in multilateralism. And that's where I think Japan and Australia and other middle powers can add weight to ASEAN initiatives. Making progress on key issues in this region, like agreeing on definitions to subsidies, can help with the overcapacity problem. And really, it's only overcapacity in some areas because we're under capacity globally on green goods, EVs, solar panels and so forth, but can also help constrain some of the spending and some of those policies in all our economies as we look to respond to the consequences and the risks with industrial policy. These kinds of initiatives can help us manage China in a broader context, as we've talked about, in a regional context, with multilateral principles. Can be what we do in Asia can be the leading edge of various coalitions that have to include Europe, Canada, and many other countries. We need these coalitions to protect space for India, for example, to realise its path towards more openness and keep that open for India. And we haven't really touched on this, except when the Vice Minister raised it this morning, but we need an open global economy as a necessary condition, I think, for an efficient energy transition. It'll be extremely difficult and extremely costly. It already is very difficult and costly to transition to a decarbonised economy without an open global system where you can source from the most efficient suppliers. So there's a big opportunity there, I think. It's not just a challenge, big opportunity for green and sustainable supply chains. I think there's a pretty big agenda ahead of us. Urata Sensei and I will reconvene to think about the next big challenge and convening the next conversation amongst RIETI-ANU, but in the region as well. So I want to just end my part of these concluding remarks by thanking Urata Sensei and thanking RIETI, but also our speakers who have made the time, shared their time to be with us today, and the audience for sticking with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shiro-san, for excellent remarks. Particularly, I like the sentences or paragraph when you said there's a middle power, which play a very important role in shaping the world trading order, so to speak, 85% of the global trade. And in particularly, I think you emphasize the importance of Japan playing this role. And I think this is a very right time, good time to send this message to a new government, which will be formed in, I don't know when, but very soon. And in this regard, I'd like to really ask officials from METI or from cabinet office like Hayashi-san sitting there to convey this message to the new administration. And I really feel kind of disappointed when I listen to some discussions among possible potential leaders of Japan. They don't talk about things like issues, international economic issues. They talk about, national security, but from very aggregate or maybe abstract perspective. Basically, their discussions focus on, inflation, what to do with, people who suffer from high prices and so on. And they are, of course, very important issues. But at the same time, I wanted to hear more about the international economic issues, which are really, we are really facing a very difficult time. And what I'd like to do, that the 3 minutes I have, is to kind of quickly review what we discussed in the first session. And as you remember, we began with the kind of two kinds of supply chain resilience, following Matsuo-san's kind of talk. We can look at the supply chain resilience from demand side and supply side, and we listen to the case of Malaysia, Indonesia, and Japan, which face somewhat different supply chain resilience problems. For Malaysia, focus, with the concentration of exporting goods, which are electronics and particularly semiconductors, and in order to produce semiconductors, what Malaysia does is assembling and so on. So they have to import parts and components and then export products. So they have to worry about two kinds of supply chain resilience. And that's a very, I think, difficult issue to deal with. While Indonesia and Japan, of course, they face a similar type of supply chain resilience, but the focus was more on supply side, how to procure materials to produce products and so on. So, so these are two aspects, two perspectives that we can look at when we discuss supply chain resilience. And in order to deal with this supply chain resilience problem, we listen to the responses which are pursued by Malaysian government, Indonesian government, and Japanese government. Basically, what I think they pursued can be described as sometimes, 3 Ps, like protection, promotion, partner. These are the, I guess, expression which is very often used to describe economic security problems. So protection of industries to achieve self-sufficiency, to promote industry to achieve self-sufficiency, and to partner with other countries to achieve self-sufficiency or diversification. And it's rather easy for me to say this, but what is difficult is the assessment of the actual policies which have been pursued by this government. I think this is a point that Yose emphasized. We have to do a very good study or assessment of the impact or the effect of these policies which are pursued in order to achieve supply chain resilience. And it's not that easy. And I think this is the task of our, economists' responsibility. And one more difficulty is this: these policies tend to have contrasting impacts on different groups. Say, talk about food processing or food processing industry, which I think Yose's past point slide had. In order to be self-sufficient in food processing, let's say food material production, raw materials, Indonesian government imposed protection of imports of these food materials, raw materials. That, of course, will have a beneficial effect on food material producers, but it has a negative impact on food processing manufacturers. So policies tend to have different impacts, or sometimes opposite impacts, on different group of people. And that is a very difficult issue that we have to deal with. So again, in order to come up with a desirable policy, we need to undertake a detailed, careful study of the impacts of the policies which have been implemented. And just 1 minute, as an economist, as I listen to all these discussions, I thought they are very difficult. Finding out the desirable self-sufficient, supply chain resilient policy. The difficulty is this. I guess Casey talked about second best situation. For the economists, we are used to dealing with the situation that we have budget constraint. Which is not so difficult to quantify. But we have another constraint. This is a national security constraint. How do you incorporate this constraint in your analysis, which is very difficult to quantify, almost maybe impossible to quantify? And so that's the situation that we are at. And another difficulty is endogeneity of policies. Economists, we are used to deal with policy as exogenous. Tariff policy, export subsidy, these are exogenous in our analysis. But what we are observing is the endogeneity of these policies. Look at what Trump does. Because of a trade surplus or deficit vis-a-vis Indonesia or whatever country, he come up with a policy, tariffs, right? So tariffs are endogenous in this case. Policies are endogenous. And this is a very new kind of environment, so to speak, for economists to study. And these are some of the difficulties that we are faced with. I'm not really trying to give you excuse for economists not doing good analysis, but these are the points which I think we need to consider in the economic analysis. And with that, of course, I'd like to, join Shiro-san in thanking panelists and all of you. Stay with us, and I hope RIETI-ANU, I'm sure, I shouldn't say hope, I'm sure RIETI-ANU collaboration will continue in the future, and I'm looking forward to that too. Thank you very much again.